Haddad is an advisor to the Syrian Minister of Information. She joins us now from Damascus. Thank you very much. Ms. Haddad, the war in Syria has been going on for several years now. What is your assessment of the situation inside the country right now?
Well, the problem started actually a long time ago, before 2011. It started with Syria always being treated as a pariah state by the West. The West and the USA always siding with Israel unconditionally. And we have examples of this. We have the occupation of the Golan and then the annexation of the Golan in '81. I mean, Security Council didn't do anything about that whatsoever. So Syrian people, as a result, have not had a good understanding or a good feeling about the policies of America and the West. When the problem started in 2011, the first call immediately was for the president to step down. It was by Obama, by Erdogan, by the British Prime Minister, by what have you, completely ignoring the will of the Syrian people and the reality on the ground. Now, there were so many fake media reports, and I'm going to give you an example of one fake media report that comes to mind. And this was of a girl called Zainab al-Husni, whom you all must remember. Apparently there was a corpse that was amputated. The girl's mother identified her. The Syrian army was accused. But lo and behold, a few days later, Zainab al-Husni is actually being interviewed by everyone. She's alive. And this kind of sort of fake reporting, this kind of blowing up things, led to a complete misunderstanding of the reality of what is happening in Syria. Today, we have an influx of terrorists, foreign fighters, from almost every single country, from Indonesia, 200, from Australia, from Belgium, from Britain. We have foreign fighters coming. They are being financed by the Gulf countries. They're being provided with logistics by Turkey. The West and America, until recently, did not even concede to the fact that there were foreign fighters. It is only now that they are aware that there is actually a problem with terrorism, which is what the president has said long time ago. President Assad has actually spoken about this problem in so many of his speeches, saying there is terrorism in Syria, and this is not only going to be in Syria, it's going to revert back to Europe, to the USA, and this is happening now.
Right, Ms. Haddad, you've given me one example of what you call disinformation. You've also told me that there are foreign fighters involved in this war, but the bulk of the fighters fighting to overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad are Syrian.
No, that's not true, actually. What was called the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, at the beginning, it doesn't exist now at all. And if it ever did exist, it was fragmented, it had no political narrative, and it acted as an umbrella for terrorist groups like al-Nusra and ISIS. The people who are fighting now are al-Nusra and ISIS, and it's a shame that they are allowed to fight in the name of Islam, because it's actually deforming what real Islam is.
Okay, you had a ceasefire plan which was on the table, brokered by the United Nations just a few days ago. That collapsed because the opposition was looking for a more comprehensive deal, as they put it, one that actually excludes President Bashar al-Assad from having any future in Syria. Is that realistic? Is that going to happen? I mean, what kind of plan does Syria have on the table? What do you have to propose?
I think what is realistic and what should be realistic is the will of the Syrian people. Now, President Bashar al-Assad, there have been recent elections. He won. The people want him. There have been rallies that support him. At the end of the day, I mean, these rallies tell a tale. There are people who support President Assad. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here. This is a fact, and this is a fact that the opposition does not like to hear. The opposition do not have any backing in Syria. Nobody knows who they are. And most of them have lived in Syria for so long, they wouldn't even know where to buy a loaf of bread.
I'm wondering how you reconcile the fact that you say that it's the will of the Syrian people when you have almost 1/3 of the country controlled by ISIL. You have millions of people who've been displaced. You have refugees numbering in the millions as well.
But that doesn't change the situation, that this is the result of a fight that has happened in which ISIS and al-Nusra were the big part of. The reason why there are so many refugees is because they lived in hotspots where ISIS took power. They fought with the Syrian army Some of them had to leave due to the fighting. At the end of the day, it's the duty of the country, of the government, to protect its people, which is what is happening. Now, if you have foreigners coming into your country, you have to protect them. This resulted in people leaving their homes to seek safer places. The people who left went to government-held areas, by the way, and not to ISIS-held areas.
Well, you talk about the government having to protect its people. Human Rights Watch, the Human Rights Monitoring Group, said 2 weeks ago that it has evidence that the government is expanding its use of barrel bombs against civilians in violation of a UN resolution in the city of Aleppo.
You know, human rights has always had a problem with Syria. It goes back a long time ago. I don't know on what they base their evidence. I don't think there are any people on the ground in Syria from human rights. If there are, they've come illegally, which also tells a tale of its own. So I wouldn't actually set a lot by what human rights tell me, because they actually have no credibility. Where were they when the Golan was occupied? Where were they in the summer of 2006? And the list is endless.
Amnesty International, another very important human rights organization, has accused the Syrian government of war crimes after it imposed a siege in Yarmouk, which resulted in the deaths of several hundred people from starvation.
But Yarmouk is actually occupied by extremists. I mean, there are fighters in there. And if you've noticed, in all these places where there are sieges and where people are hungry, the fighters themselves are actually, and look, very well fed. And this is also something that should be taken into consideration. The food that enters, the same way that the arms enter, is actually taken, a lot of it, by the fighters.
Well, tell me then, what is the Syrian government's solution to this problem? What are the proposals that you have on the table? Does the Syrian government see a military solution here?
No, always the Syrian government has sought a political solution. The political solution is through local ceasefires to begin with, then reconciliation, people talking to each other, sitting around a table and talking to each other, something that the Syrian government has always said in its talks everywhere that it is willing to do, yet the opposition has said that they do not want to do it. And the real problem, I mean, if you want to really solve the problem, is the USA, the Europe, Turkey, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia must stop providing money and arms for the people coming into Syria across the borders.
All right, let me get back to the situation inside Syria. The United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution last week which condemned the use of chlorine. 14 of the 15 members on the Security Council passed that resolution. Are Syrian government forces using chlorine?
Not that I know of, and I can definitely deny the use of chlorine. Chlorine was used, but it was used by the opposition. And I think that was documented in many places.
Now, in terms of the threat posed by ISIL to the Syrian government, is the Syrian government in any way talking to the United States about countering that threat posed by ISIL? Is it in any way coordinating its opposition with the United States or any other forces?
What I do know is that when the United States decided to launch strikes against ISIS, the Syrian government was informed. Other than that, there is no coordination or cooperation. And may I say that these strikes against ISIS are not really very effective.
You know, as we've been reporting, there's something like 12 million people in Syria now needing humanitarian assistance, about half of them children, 9 million refugees. The question is, what's left of Syria right now?
Well, what's left of Syria is quite a good bit. The media always focuses on the destruction and on what's happened to ordinary people. Now, undoubtedly, Syria has been hit and hit hard. But life goes on and people are struggling. They want to live. They want to go on. Most of all, they want security and they want protection from extremism. And this is what the Syrian government is trying to do.
If one looks at Syria's position in the region right now, is it effectively isolated from its neighbors?
I think what's happening in Syria is actually happening in many other countries, which means it's not isolated. I mean, in Lebanon we have problems with extremists. In Jordan we have problems. In Iraq, look at what's happening. Even in Turkey, there is a problem with extremism, and there's a problem with the Kurds. in Lebanon, there is also a problem. I've already mentioned that. So no, I do not think what is happening in Syria is in isolation. I think it's a wave that's hit the Middle East, and I think a lot of responsibility lies on the shoulders of the USA and the West.
Ms. Haddad, thanks for joining us. That was Reem Haddad, advisor to the Syrian Minister of Information, talking to us from